Hello there and welcome to our second normalisation video looking at second normal form. Please make sure that you've already seen first normal form before you jump into this video because this won't make sense otherwise. In front of us now we have our two tables, certificates and members, and they are in first normal form. For something to be classed as second normal form, first it must be in first normal form, and now it must have no partial dependencies. So what is a partial dependency? Partial dependencies normally arise when you have a table that has a composite key. And looking at our certificates table, that has a composite key. The member table has a primary key made up of a member ID, and that is a single attribute. So this has no foreign keys inside it, and therefore, because it's just got one primary key, it is already in second normal form. The problem that we've got is the fact that the certificate table has a composite primary key. And remember, a composite key is two attributes merged together to make something unique. So it needs to be looked at further. You need to determine whether any non-key fields, so a non-key field is something that's not a primary key or a foreign key in the table, and we need to look to see if any of our non-key fields in the table are dependent on either of the fields that make up the composite primary key. In this case, member ID or course code. So is anything such as assessment date, description, fee, instructor last name, first name or email, are any of those dependent on either the course code or member ID? So to help us identify any partial dependencies in the certificate table, the attributes that make up the primary key have been highlighted. And you can see here our highlighted attributes, member ID and course code, and they are the two attributes that make up the composite key. The non-key fields are not highlighted. So let's go through them one by one and see if they have any partial dependencies. And the first one to look at is the assessment date. Now the member has an assessment on that date and they are assessed on that course. So the assessment date is dependent on both the member ID and the course code itself. So that means it needs to stay where it is. It needs to remain in this table. If I moved it out of this, then it would struggle to be dependent on both columns. If I moved it out into a separate table, it wouldn't be dependent on both anymore, and that would break its relationship. And I don't want to do that. So we move on, and we have a look at description. So this is dependent on just the course code. So for example, whenever you see the code CR0001, you will find the description kayaking, for example. However, the member IDs are different. So therefore, description is not dependent on member ID. It is partially dependent on the composite key. It's partially dependent on the course code. Let's have a look at fee now. Fee is also dependent on the course code. And again, wherever you see something like SO0112, you will always see 20. If you look at CR0001, you will always see £100. So that means that the fee is dependent on the course. And that makes sense, because you've got a course code, you've got a description of what that course is, and then you've got the fee that you pay to go on that course. And in my head, logically, they link together. So now let's consider the instructor last name. So this is dependent on the whole composite key. It's the surname of the instructor who assessed a specific member for a specific award. So the instructor first name and the instructor email can also be treated in the same way. So instructor first name, last name and instructor email, they are all dependent upon the course because, for example, Sue James will teach tennis, Mohammed Franks will teach kayaking, for example, and Jay Linton will also do judo, for example. People like Greta will do judo and also swimming. So they relate to the courses, which relates to the course code, and the member is assessed by that instructor, and that's down to the assessment date. So for example, 131092 is Joe Donald from our members table, and they were assessed on the 15th of April 2019, and they were doing the CR001 course, which was kayaking. They paid £100 and they were assessed by Mohammed Franks, and there's Mohammed Franks' email. So for now, the instructor needs to stay where they are because they're dependent on the whole primary key, which is the member ID and the course code. And when I say the whole primary key, I mean the composite key. That makes up a unique identifier, which becomes the primary key. So for second normal form, I need to make sure that there are no partial dependencies. And I told you before, the description and the fee are partially dependent. They're not wholly dependent. They're only dependent on the course code. So they've got to go. And that's why I make a courses table. I put the description and the fee inside there, and I put the course code inside there. The course code now becomes a primary key, and then inside here it becomes a foreign key, and my two foreign keys have made my composite primary key. No problem. So far I'm pretty happy. This is wholly dependent, wholly dependent, wholly dependent, and wholly dependent. Partially dependent in description, partially dependent in fee, so therefore it's got to go. No partial dependencies allowed. And down here, I just moved these two together just so you can see it a little bit better. Looking at these tables now, we are now in second normal form. In the next video, we're going to look at what steps we need to take to get this into third normal form. I'll see you there.